of the bus network. We set up a dedicated voicemail line and project email address that people could call in and leave voicemails where they could email. We held focus groups with community-based organizations. Some of those were virtual, some were in person. We held 13 street team events where our multilingual staff went out to bus stops and stations and talked to folks. At some stations, we did a larger setup where we brought a table and lots more material. So those were called station open houses. So we ended up doing 25 of those events. We advertised the comment period in multiple languages. We ran audio announcements on buses. And then we had tons of meetings with municipalities, elected officials, et cetera. And we did what we call in-reach to bus operators. So we run around to bus garages in the system and talk to bus operators about the proposed changes to get their feedback on it. We actually ended up incorporating a lot of the feedback that we got from bus operators into our route planning. So we heard a lot of comments from folks. Actually, the amount of feedback we got far exceeded our expectations. So I think that's a sign of the success of the public engagement part of this. In general, there was a lot of support for increasing the amount of frequent service in the network, having more midday and weekend service. Like, as you all know, the bus network right now is very oriented to morning and evening peak periods. On a lot of routes, frequencies really drop midday, and on some routes, there's no weekend service. So as part of the network redesign, what we tried to do was not just increase service across the board, but really add a lot of midday service and weekend service so that service would be a lot more consistent for folks. We know that the bus network as it exists today doesn't really provide service to meet the demand for travel. Obviously, there's a lot of people traveling in non-peak periods that we're not really doing a good job of serving right now. So there was a lot of support for the midday and weekend service. And then service to new destinations. Obviously, there's places like Kendall, the South Boston Seaport, parts of Everett and Chelsea and Somerville, and other parts of Boston and other towns where there's been a lot of housing development and commercial development that is not well served by the existing bus network. So we tried to reorient service so that we'd provide a lot better connections to those places. And we basically figured out how to do that, or how we designed the routes was based on location-based services data. So cell phone data for the entire region, it's mode agnostic. This is not based on existing ridership, because that's not a good way to design a transit network. It doesn't capture latent demand. I mean, if you have routes that have a lot of ridership, you know those routes are doing well. If you have routes that have low ridership, that doesn't necessarily mean that the demand doesn't exist. It might be because the service is awful. So by using mode agnostic travel data, we're able to see just how people are getting around in general by all modes of transportation. And then we could redesign services to try to meet that demand with the hope that folks will shift modes. If they're currently driving, they may shift to transit instead if we provide a better service. So there was a lot of support for those elements of bus network redesign. And this graph at the bottom here, there was a comment in the online feedback forum that asked folks, do you generally agree with bus network redesign and increasing service? 40% of respondents either agreed or strongly agreed, 48% disagreed or strongly disagreed. And for the folks who disagreed, usually the disagreement wasn't about improving the bus network. The disagreement was about specific route proposals that we had. They didn't like the way that we had redesigned specific routes or service in certain communities. So you can really see that in this chart here. In that form, we also asked people to select neighborhoods that they wanted to comment on. And you can see, so the bars in red are that percent disagree. The bars in blue are the percent agree. You can see, we've organized this by percent disagree. That's the largest disagreement is at the bottom of the graph. As you can see, Charlestown and Somerville, South Boston, East Boston, Winthrop, Medford, Arlington, Woburn, Boston, some of the North Shore communities, Cambridge, Roxbury, Belmont, Newton, JP, Fenway, Back Bay, Newton. These were the places where we had the most disagreement and also received the greatest number of comments. So the column on the right-hand side is the total number of comments received through that online feedback form related to these neighborhoods. Obviously, we considered all comments equally, regardless of the way that they were submitted to us. But this bucket of comments were easy to quantify, basically because of the way the online feedback form was set up. For like voicemails and emails and stuff like that, we did read and listen to all of them and then coded them in a spreadsheet and to the best we could tell, I guess you'd call it the attitude of the comment, like whether it was supportive or unsupportive. But obviously that's subjective. That's us listening to comments and then assessing whether we think it's a supportive or unsupportive comment. In this case, with the online feedback form, this was the respondents themselves telling us if they're supportive or unsupportive of this. So you can see the areas where we had the greatest disagreement about what we were proposing in the draft network and where we got the most comments. And I do just want to point out that there were some disproportionate numbers here. So Charlestown and Somerville, in the online feedback form, we had grouped those neighborhoods together or communities together, which is why they're listed together there. We got 6,500 comments from folks about the routes in Somerville and Charlestown. We got 5,000 about routes in Cambridge. There were some other communities where we got a lot too, but you can see for some of these, we got very few through the online feedback form. Sometimes that's an indication of more support, because people who were not in support had a greater incentive to leave comments. And sometimes it's an indication of how people engaged in the process. Like certain communities, if there's a lot of seniors, for instance, they didn't engage with the online feedback form as much. They used the voicemail line more. They were calling in rather than using the online feedback form, or they were coming to our in-person events or some of the virtual events. But as I said, we considered all the comments that we got equally. This is just a way to quantify some of these comments in a way that's not a subjective decision by our team. The feedback obviously varies by route as well. So not only did we ask folks to comment on neighborhoods, but we asked folks to comment on specific routes. And you can see the 10 most frequently commented routes here in that feedback form are a lot of Somerville, Arlington, Medford, Cambridge routes. So 87, 89, 88, 80, the 96. The 39 also got a lot of comments. 94, the 90, the 11 got a lot of comments as well over in South Boston. And then the 354, which is an express bus from Burlington and Woburn to Medford Square and then down 93 into downtown. We also, I mentioned the petitions that we got. You can see that's actually one way that a lot of seniors participated in this process. Rather than going through the online feedback form, they gathered signatures in their communities and submitted petitions to us. So we got a couple petitions from residents of the Clarendon Hill Towers and the surrounding neighborhoods, over 500 signatures between those two. We got a signature with almost 1,700 signatures from folks in Medford, because there were some very strong feelings about what we proposed there. So a lot of ways for folks to engage in this process, got a lot of great feedback from folks. And we've now looked at all of that and incorporated that feedback into what we're calling the revised bus network, which some of you have already seen, and I will present to you this morning. So the feedback, it was generally grouped into three main categories. There were concerns from the public, elected officials, municipal staff, et cetera, about the route proposals. There were concerns from folks about the way that we were connecting to medical facilities, senior housing, shopping centers, those kind of destinations, particularly in situations where there currently exists a one-seat ride from certain neighborhoods to certain hospitals. And in the proposal, it would have required a transfer. Now, if we implement this revised bus network, services are going to be a lot better than exists today. They're going to be a lot more frequent, a lot more reliable. So in that situation, transfers won't be as big of a penalty for folks as they are today. But obviously for a lot of our riders, seniors, people with disabilities, It doesn't matter really how reliable and frequent the service is, the transfer can still be really tough, especially in situations where there's really challenging topography or, not ADA compliant sidewalks, stuff like that. So we heard a lot of feedback on that, and we made a lot of changes in the network to try to reduce the number of transfers that folks would have to take to get to places like hospitals or, grocery stores or other destinations like that. And then we made some changes due to concerns from our operators and from municipalities about the length of some of the routes that we proposed. So we proposed some really long crosstown routes that, if we get enough transit priority along the routes, we think would have worked okay. But even in the best case scenario where we get all the transit priority that we want, it's still a lot to ask of operators to be running some of those really long routes, especially if they don't get breaks in between or have good bathroom access at one end or another. So that's a consistent problem in the bus network right now. So that's something that we took to heart, and we decided to sort of split up some of those really long routes based on that feedback that we got. All right, so I've kind of already covered some of this, but we basically we reviewed all the feedback that we got, kept in mind the service design principles that we had developed for developing the initial draft network. We've incorporated as many of those changes, the feedback that we got, into the new network as we possibly could. We're obviously not able to make every change that was requested of us, but the new network that we're presenting here is very reflective of what we heard during the public engagement process. And we've been previewing it with municipalities. Actually, many of the folks on this call have already seen this. We're getting really good responses from municipal staff and the community organizations that we've been showing this to, and the electeds. So actually this afternoon, we have a couple legislative briefings for different delegations. And after today, we will have briefed, or given the opportunity to brief, every single state rep and senator in the bus service area. And we're getting really positive feedback from folks about this, because obviously the state reps are getting calls about some of these route proposals, and a lot of them are really happy to see that we have made the changes that we have. So in general, the revised network is still going to be a 25% increase in service across the network. We're still doubling the number of high frequency corridors. And actually, that's sort of I don't think that actually does a really good job of describing sort of how much better this new service is going to be. So the current, what we call frequent service, the key bus routes, aren't even actually as frequent and as much service as the new frequent corridors are going to be in the new network. So when we say a high frequency corridor, it's a service that's every 15 minutes or better, 7 days a week from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. And when I say every 15 minutes or better, 15-minute headways should be the worst that it ever is. It should be better than that, actually, during some periods of time. Like there are some routes during rush hour that are every 4 minutes or every 8 minutes. And the intent is for those services to continue to be that frequent. 15 minutes is sort of the threshold for the frequency. We don't want it to be any worse than that. But the key bus routes that exist today, many of them don't actually meet that definition. So we're not just doubling the number of frequent corridors, we're massively expanding the amount of frequent service that exists or would exist in the network. We ended up making changes to 85 of 133 routes in the proposal. So around 2/3 of the routes changed. The changes range from really small tweaks to routing to get closer to hospitals, or just in response to the feedback that we got from municipalities. Some municipalities said, like, hey, you proposed a bus on this road, we think it should be a block over on this road instead. So we made a lot of those changes to routes. We also made some frequency and span adjustments to routes. So those were sort of the minor changes. And then on the other end of the range, we made massive wholesale changes to routes. In some cases, we took routes that exist today and just put them back in the network as they exist today, or with better frequency than they have today, because of the feedback that we got from folks. So all the changes kind of run the gambit from really small changes to really massive changes. There were 5 main reasons why we made changes, and these sort of reflect what I've already talked about in the public feedback that we got. We made changes to respond to public feedback, to improve access to hospitals and other destinations, to reduce walk distances for seniors and other riders, to preserve some of those existing one-seat rides that are in the network. And then lastly, to balance resources, because there is a max number of buses that we can run at any given time. And that's a hard limit. We can't go beyond that, right? Without expanding the size of the fleet, which means upgrading bus facilities or the maintenance and storage facilities, which is a process that is underway, of course. But we're trying to implement this new network in the next 5 years. And the timeline on upgrading all of the bus maintenance facilities is much longer than that. Obviously, some of those are already underway, like North Quincy, North Cambridge, like some of those projects are underway and are in the design process, but some of the bus facilities aren't going to be reconstructed for many, many years. So we have some hard limits that we have to stay in. The other is sort of the budgeted amount of service that we can provide. And yeah, we actually did, so Melissa, just let me know, this also reflects 60 more buses than are running today. So we're factoring in the expansion of the fleet in the timeline of implementing bus network redesign. So quick summary of some of the changes, and then I'll walk through these. I have slides that show the maps before and after. We can also, I have an interactive map we can switch to if folks want to like pan around the region and look at them. So there were routes that we just restored as they exist today, either in whole or in part. Those reroutings that I mentioned, we added some new routes to the proposal. Some of these numbers are routes that exist today, and these routes that we added would sometimes do something similar to what that route does today, but not necessarily the exact same thing that it does. We adjusted frequency and span, as I mentioned, and then there were some routes that we had proposed that we removed, usually because of other changes that were made into the routes in that particular area. So in some cases, what ended up happening was we would make a change to one route, and that would create a gap in the network that we didn't want to have happen. So we would move another route to close that gap. That creates another gap. So there were sort of packages of changes that we made where we'd adjust 4 or 5 different routes at the same time in order to respond to the feedback that we got or restore some connections that exist without creating new gaps in the network. So this series of slides consist of screenshots of what we had proposed back in May on the left and what we have in the revised network on the right. The routes here are in numerical order. They're not ordered by significance of change or anything like that. So they're in numerical order. So the first like 30 of these slides are City of Boston routes, just because all those low numbers are, you know, in Boston and some of the connecting communities. I know folks here are from many different municipalities, so I'm happy to switch to other parts of the network if folks want to see what we had proposed. And I obviously will share this slide deck with all of you. I can also share the interactive map that we have if folks want to take a look at that. I should pause here for a second and note that this isn't technically public information yet. We will be putting this out to the public next week on Thursday morning. So on Wednesday afternoon, we will be briefing what has been historically called the Project Task Force, which ended up being a group that just got bigger and bigger and bigger with every meeting, to the point where I forwarded the calendar invite last week to something like 120 municipal staff. So the meeting is open to the public. It's really meant for municipalities, community-based organizations, the folks who have been involved in this process. But it's open to anybody. If you want the calendar invite for that, I'm happy to forward it to you if you don't have it on your calendar already. And then you can forward it to anybody else in your respective communities as well. So we're gonna preview the revised network. Yeah.
So just quickly, I know you said the information itself is not public yet, but is it okay to share when you're going to release the information?
Yeah.
So we could communicate. So we could help communicate to the public that you're releasing next Thursday afternoon.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to have that big briefing on Wednesday afternoon, and then all of this is going to go live on the project website on Thursday morning. So we're going to publish the interactive map, a static map, and a list of all of the changes that were made between the draft network and the revised network. And then on Thursday, we'll be presenting to the MBTA Board of Directors about all these changes. They're not going to vote on it or anything in this meeting. It's just going to be like an update to them and sort of essentially the public reveal of these changes. Yeah, Matt.
One other question too. So, thanks very much for presenting this to us now and then presenting it to us from, to the City of Boston staff about a week ago. I know we had sort of pushed back on this route change specifically. We support the T8. We don't love the idea of it going on Harrison Ave. We very much support the former routing on Albany Street. Will minor tweaks like that be made before this goes to the public? I just don't want to set expectations with the public kind of seesawing back and forth between these things, especially relatively minor tweaks like this.
We unfortunately are not able to make those changes before this goes public. And the reason why is because right now, CTPS is conducting an equity analysis of the revised network, and they expect that to take just under 2 months. So they're going to have that complete by December. And then we'll ask the board to vote on the service changes based on the equity analysis in December. But if we make any tweaks to the map now, it sort of interrupts CTPS's process, and then their analysis won't be done until into the new year. And just so you all know, as you may already know, the majority of the MBTA Board of Directors is coterminous with the governor and will, as we understand it, not be on the board anymore once there is a new governor. We don't know how long it will take for the new governor to appoint a board, or what the implications of that change would be for this process if it doesn't get board approval before the end of the year. The goal is to begin implementing this in, it's going to be in stages over a 5-year period. We want to start implementing it, or parts of it, beginning next summer. And there's a lot of capital projects that need to get underway. There are places where we're going to have to reconstruct bus stops, build transit priority facilities, or just modify intersections so that buses can make the turns. So there's a lot of construction that's going to have to happen in order to make some of these route changes possible. And we want to get that work underway as soon as we possibly can, because we all know construction timelines can take, 2 or 3 years, depending on the scale. So our hope is to bring this to the board in October, present it to them, then show it to the public. We're going to have a public meeting Wednesday, November 2nd. Then we're going to bring it back to the board on November 17th and ask them to take a preliminary vote on it. So they can't technically approve a service change without an equity analysis. So we're going to ask them to basically make a preliminary vote that's not binding, just to sort of like signal the institutional commitment to this massive investment and transformation of the bus network over this 5-year period. And then the equity analysis will be done early December. We have to hold a public meeting for the equity analysis. So we'll do that. We're thinking the week of December 5th, but we haven't locked down a date yet. And then we'll go back to the board at their December meeting and ask them to take the actual binding vote once the equity analysis is available. So it's a really tight timeline, unfortunately. Like, I would have loved the luxury of more time to do more public engagement and to your point, Matt, to incorporate some of those small changes into this before we brought it to the board. But there is a real concern that if we don't get this approved before the end of the calendar year, that it may take a while for a new board to be in place, and we may basically lose a year of implementation, and all the funding that would come with the capital projects and everything like that. So we're trying really hard to make sure that process doesn't get pushed back really far or get interrupted. But we know that there are a lot of comments from municipalities like the one you just brought up, and we are amenable to continuing to refine this map and make some of these changes as we move into implementation. So, and also just to clarify too, we haven't identified bus stop locations for all these routes yet. Like these maps show dots where bus stops would be. That's a combination of where existing stops are, and in places where there aren't existing stops, the software we use just automatically assigned stop locations based on a set distance, not where it is appropriate to have stops. So we haven't identified where all the stops are going to be. There's a lot of inaccessible stops in the system, of course, that are going to have to be upgraded or consolidated or moved. Any new stop that gets created is going to be accessible. So there's a lot of fine details to work out, and that work is starting to get underway and is going to be a big part of implementation. So we're going to show this map to the board and to the public, but we're going to, couch it or have a caveat that the exact routing of these routes is subject to change based on availability of transit priority, changing road conditions like reconstruction projects, new developments that happen in the next 5 years, and bus stop locations, things like that. So, Matt, I know BTD is working on bus lanes on Albany. Obviously, if bus lanes were to happen on Albany, we would rethink how we have some of these services routed around BMC. Like we made these changes around BMC in response to comments that they gave us about improving access to their facilities. But obviously, if the road conditions change out there, we're going to reconsider that. And we're certainly amenable to having those conversations as this process moves forward. But just because of the timeline that we're under, we basically have to bring this to the public and the board as we have it here.
Okay, I guess just one favor then, please don't emphasize this one to the public. Maybe if it has to be in there, it has to be in there, but maybe just don't emphasize it too much.
Understood. Yeah, and we're going to put a big asterisk on all of this and say like subject to considerations in implementation. That's especially important, obviously, in downtown because we have a proposed routing for the T7, but obviously you all are working on transit priority in downtown, and then in the LMA too. The elementary school group is walking by my house, and my dog always gets really upset about it. The challenges of working from home, but in the LMA, we're working with the Longwood Collective, formerly Masco, to figure out the exact routing of buses and where the layover facility would be. There's obviously the Kenmore Fenway planning study. There's going to be an LMA planning study conducted by MassDOT as well. So those planning studies are going to have some implications for bus network redesign, and bus network redesign will adjust based on what comes out of those planning studies. So what we're presenting here is sort of like the ultimate vision for the bus network, but some of those details are going to end up adjusting over the course of implementation. So yeah, I can skip around through these. I do want to highlight some really big changes. So let's see, I won't go through each one of these in the same level of detail unless folks want me to pause on anything. And if so, please let me know. The 11 though, this is a big change. We had proposed the 11 going to the Broadway Red Line station. There's a lot of folks in South Boston who take the 11 today to get to Tufts Medical Center. What it does today is it loops through downtown and then comes down A Street. So we extended this over to Tufts Medical Center to continue to provide that one-seat ride for folks in South Boston. So they wouldn't have to transfer to other services to get to the hospital. I know that Matt in the city of Boston have concerns about us not having service on A Street with all the development that's being permitted there and will be there in the future. But that's obviously something that we're happy to continue to talk about too. T12, this is a brand new high frequency route. Obviously it doesn't exist today. There are no buses on this part of D Street today. And there's going to need to be some construction work in order to allow for two-way bus traffic. There is a sort of traffic diverter down on D Street and Dot Ave where it's only one-way traffic. It's two-way for people on bikes, but we'd have to move some curbs in order to get buses through there. But this is a brand new connection to the seaport. It connects to the Andrew Red Line station and then over to the LMA and Brookline Village. We did make a change to this between what was proposed and the new map. We had proposed it connecting to Ruggles and then going down Alnea Cass, but this is going to be a major route for people, for especially employees getting to Boston Medical Center. And we know that it's a really challenging pedestrian condition or environment from Mass and Cass to BMC. So BMC asked us if we could get some of these services closer to their front door for the patients and staff that are going there. So we rerouted this to go through Nubian Square and then up Washington and down Mass Ave. So it does get closer to the entrance of BMC, but otherwise the route is the same and continues to provide that connection between Brookline Village, LMA, and then the seaport. Then we made some changes in Roxbury and Roslindale and Dorchester that all kind of flow from each other. I will, let me stick to the highlights. The 45, this is a route that we put back in that wasn't in the initial proposal. We put it back in response to the feedback we got and because of some changes that we made to the 14. We also added in a 41. We had not been proposing, show on the next slide, we had not been proposing service on Heath Street. Obviously, there's the VA hospital on the back of Mission Hill. A lot of folks using bus service to get over to it. So we hadn't, because of some of the changes we had in the draft, there wasn't going to be bus service on Heath Street, but we realized this was a really important connection for folks. So we added in the 41. And it goes from Heath to Jackson Square to Nubian and then over to JFK UMass. The T15, this was somewhat of a big change. This is an example of a route that was really long and we ended up breaking it up into two routes because of how long it was. So this was going to be a high frequency service from Brighton through Brookline to the LMA to Ruggles, Nubian, and then over to Fields Corner. We ended up splitting this into two routes. So the new T15 goes from Fields Corner through Nubian to Ruggles, and then we added in a 65. So in this case, on this slide, both of these routes are in the new network. This isn't a before and after, this is both after. So these two routes make up what had been proposed as the full T15. So the 65 would go from Brighton to Ruggles through the LMA. So folks would be able to connect if they were going all the way across town. There'd be a good transfer at Ruggles, in addition to all of the other routes that are going to go through Ruggles that folks could transfer to. Obviously, Ruggles is currently a hub for many bus routes, but that'll, if anything, that will be more so the case in the new network. We added in the 17. So like I said, I'm just going through these in numerical order because that's how I have this deck set up. We made some changes to the 18 to connect to Fields Corner and Auckland Street to get closer to senior housing. Made some adjustments to the 19 and then added back in the 44 or part of it. So this, in this case too, these are both in the new network. In a lot of the cases, as I mentioned before, we shifted some services around and then that would have opened up gaps in coverage in the network. So then we either reintroduced services that either already exist or made some other changes in order to close those gaps in coverage. So that's what we did here. We had the 19 was going to go on Humboldt Ave, but we moved it over to Warren. That would have created a gap on Humboldt Ave. So then we added the 44 back in. This is a route that exists today. We didn't put it back in its entirety, but folks would be able to transfer either at Jackson or at Nubian to other services that go through those hubs. We made some changes down in Dorchester and the Neponset area to what we had proposed as the 20. Basically, we put the 201 and 202 back, put the 26 back to the way that it is today. We had proposed what you see on the left here for the 26. We basically just restored it to what it does today because we got a lot of feedback from folks in that part of the network that the services that exist work for the trips that they're making, and some of the transfers that we were proposing weren't going to work for riders down there. So we ended up putting a lot of services back sort of the way they are, because they function well for riders now. 29th is the one where we had proposed it connecting over to Ashmont. What you see on the right hand side is what it does today. We put it back the way that it exists today. And so that was a pretty big change. Then made some changes to the 34. This is a big one, T39. We had proposed this crosstown high frequency route. 39 was going to come up from Jamaica Plain through the LMA into Cambridge, connecting to Porter. We heard a lot of feedback from folks on this route. This route has some history, you could say. It was created when the MBTA discontinued the Arborway Green Line service. So there's a lot of history here. Folks have been riding this route for a really long time. There's established travel patterns for riders on this route. And if we had continued with what we had proposed, we would have been asking folks to transfer to the Green Line at a location that isn't the best transfer for going from bus to rail. And there are a lot of seniors who are using this route too. So we basically put the 39 back to the way that it is. But because of that, we basically chopped off the northern half of this route that was going to connect into Cambridge. So we added in a new high frequency route, the T47. So again, these are both in the new map instead of a before and after. This T47 is going to go from Ruggles through the LMA, through Cambridge Port, Central Square, and then into Union. So folks will be able to transfer between these two high frequency services if they're going from JP to Cambridge, in addition to obviously the existing orange line to red line connection that they have.
Hey, Doug, can I just jump in here real quick and just do a time check? We got about 18 minutes left. So I don't know if folks on the call have specific routes they'd like to see or discuss. Matt, maybe you could take those, or and I guess we will need a couple of minutes at the very end to discuss kind of what we want to do next as a committee. So, if you could just be cognizant of that time. Sorry to constrain you even more. But I don't know, Matt, if you want to look at specific routes or how you want to play it. But we got about 10 more minutes before we kind of got to wrap this up.
Can I propose that I talk about, there's like 5 more routes that I think are really worth mentioning, if that's okay with folks.
And yeah, I think I've already seen a lot of this, Doug, on the
Yeah.
Boston side. So maybe if it's non-Boston routes that you want to focus on.
Sure. Yeah, I do just want to mention the 55. This is a really, really big change. What you see on the right is what the 55 does today. We put it back to the way that it is in response to the feedback that we got from folks. We had proposed it connecting from LMA to Kendall. So we would have lost that connection by putting this 55 back. So we ended up adding this new route 85, which goes from Ruggles through the LMA up to Kendall, and then it keeps going north from Kendall through Union and up to Assembly. So that was a big change in this draft network. Let's see. 104, this is a route that goes from Malden to, it was going to go to Wood Island. We extended it to the airport station. So that was a change that, that Chelsea have requested. Everett and Malden all supported it, and Massport supported it too, and have been really helpful in figuring out the layover there. Let's see. I want to talk, there's that 104 again. 354, this is an express bus that exists today. We did not have it in the initial proposal. We put it back. It would do the route that it does today, Burlington to Woburn, and then express. It routes through Medford Square and then continues down 93 into downtown the way that it does today. Let's see. And then I kind of want to talk about some of the changes over in the Arlington, Somerville, Medford part of the world, because this is where some of the most significant changes were made. I mean, you saw the feedback that we got from this part of the network. High levels of disagreement. Folks did not like what we had proposed. So a lot of changes over there. This one is in Cambridge. The 74 was not in the draft proposal. It's an existing route. Heard a lot of feedback about Concord Ave. Folks in Cambridge who use this to get from Belmont to Harvard. So we put it back in the network. Then the 80. So the 80 right now goes from Arlington Center to Lechmere. A lot of this route is duplicative of the Green Line extension, which I'm literally checking my watch every day to see when this thing will open and want to be on one of the first trips when it does. We had not included the 80 in our draft network. Got a lot of feedback on it. Obviously, the Green Line extension only goes to Medford and Tufts Hills, Medford Hillside. So we put the 80 back to make that final leg that it does today, Arlington Center to Tufts, and then we actually extended this into Davis Square. So there's going to be this connection from Arlington Center to Davis by way of Medford Hillside and the Tufts station. But then this was a situation where we paired this change with some other changes that we made out in like Lexington, Burlington, Woburn part of the network. So the 80 goes all the way to Burlington, goes by the Burlington Mall. And this one, we were shifting services around sort of as part of that package of restoring the 354 and some of these other changes that were made. So this is a route that goes from Burlington all the way to Davis and makes that final leg of the existing 80. 83, we had proposed going to Kendall. Cambridge asked for us to put it to Central, which is what it does now. So we put that back. 87, in this case, we shifted some routes around in Somerville and Medford. And every time we did, we had to shift another route around essentially to close a gap in coverage. So the 87 right now, or as is proposed, is going to go from north of Arlington through Arlington Center to Davis and then Sullivan. We just put it back basically the way that it exists today. What you see here on the right is the existing 87, and we put it back. It has better frequency during sometimes than it does today, but we had heard a lot from folks at a senior housing complex here, the Clarendon Hill Towers, that the proposal that we had was not going to serve their needs very well. So we made a lot of adjustments to accommodate that and the other feedback that we got in this part of the network, because there was a lot. So the 87, we put it back to what it does today. That created this gap on Mystic Ave. We then took what we had proposed as the 95 and shifted it onto Mystic Ave. There's a lot of development underway on Mystic Ave that Medford is working on. They wanted more service on this corridor, so we shifted this over, and then that would have created this gap going to Wellington. So then we revised our 134 proposal to make that connection. So you can see this like succession of changes in response to what we had done. 89, we just put it back in the network because right now there's a 1-seat ride from Winter Hill to Davis that we were basically going to break into a 2-seat ride, but folks would have had to go kind of out of the way in order to do that. So we put the 89 back to continue to make that connection. It only goes to Davis though. There are some trips now where it goes to Clarendon Hill, but a big part of our service design principles was routes should do the same thing all the time and always go to the same places so that folks don't have to worry like, oh, it's a Saturday or a Sunday. Is this the bus that's going to get me home, or is this the bus that's going to go to a totally different place just because it's a different day or a different time? So that's something that we incorporated into our service design planning. We wanted routes to be consistent to eliminate a lot of confusion and situations where you might get stranded because it's the wrong time of day.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I know we're starting to run up against time. Do we want to maybe pause for general or route specific questions?
I think that's worthwhile. Yeah, if anybody wants me to show any routes, happy to. I can also share the interactive map that that populated all of these screenshots. So I'll just show you what that looks like. This is the map here. We're going to release this to the public. We're going to color code it and clean up the names so that it's a little bit easier to read for folks. You may remember we put one of these out for the draft map that was color coded by route frequency. So we're going to do that again. But I can share the link to this with you all if you want to take a look at it before it gets officially published next week.
So I just have a quick yes or no question. All right, are the visitors on the number of responses that you give me for the online responses. Those are unique, right?
Those were unique comments, not necessarily unique respondents. So we didn't ask people to identify themselves in the online feedback form. So in some cases, those are individual folks making multiple comments.
Okay.
We can look at IP addresses to see sort of how many unique logins we think we got, but obviously like multiple people using one computer in a household, same IP address.
Yeah, because the Arlington numbers are like 5% of the population. So it's like, I'd like to think we were that engaged, but I just like, okay, thank you, you know?
Hey, thanks for the presentation, Melissa. I had a question about span. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So there was because of the 3 basic categories in the original proposal, it made it seem like a lot of routes were ending at 7 p.m., say, and things like that. And is that going to be much more clarified, or is that, is it back to 10 p.m. or 12:30 a.m.? Like, is that?
Yeah.
Great question, Todd. So the new version of the interactive map and some of our outreach materials were being more explicit. So instead of having kind of 3 categories and everything is exactly one of those categories, we've been a little more, I'll say, surgical, so that you can see for any particular route. If it already goes until midnight and we expect to continue that it will go till midnight, we've clarified that in our outreach materials so that it can just be more clear. So in some cases, that means we've also added more resources in to make sure that the later evening spans can be preserved.
Yeah, we're going to have a table on the project website that describes all of the routes, the change that was made, what the route will do, and the frequency by time of day, so that folks in like the list, the table on the project website will be like the be all end all for information about the routes in case there are situations where it's not exactly what's in this map.
That's very helpful. For the rest of the committee, it basically, the way it was presented before, it looks like after 7 p.m. the whole north half of Medford didn't have any service, so it was important.
Understood. Yeah. Brian or Andy, I don't know, Brian, if you want to call on folks or.
Well, I'll go, and then I guess Andy can go. So let me ask the kind of 50,000-foot question, and I'm mostly playing devil's advocate here. So massive budget deficits on the operating and capital budget coming in 24. No operators, not growing the fleet. You can't get North Quincy off the ground, let alone any other bus facilities. Is this implementable? And if so, how?
I do think this is implementable. The biggest challenge is going to be operators. So we obviously have an operator shortage right now, and that's the case at transit agencies, as you all know, across the country. Our implementation plan is taking that into consideration right now. We're basically anticipating that we can ramp up hiring over that 5-year period. So we wouldn't be providing all of this service in years 1 through 4. Like, this is the amount of service that we'd be providing in year 5. And sort of the steepness of that ramp up is going to depend on how our ability to hire more operators. So in the earlier years, we're anticipating that we're probably going to be focusing more on capital changes and on probably revenue neutral, or not revenue neutral, sorry, operator neutral changes, like places where we can make adjustments given the number of operators that we have now, and get all those construction projects that we can underway in anticipation of being able to provide the service 3 to 5 years from now.
So you're also banking on a funding increase then over that 5 years?
We are, yes. This is, the cost of the service, the operating cost has been factored into the TEAS pro forma, which is going to be presented in an upcoming board meeting. I can't remember which one. I think it might be one of the subcommittee meetings. But we worked into the pro forma so that it's sort of the amount that it will cost will ramp up year by year, depending on the operator headcount.
If I could also underscore something Doug said, the operator deficit is probably kind of one of the biggest issues facing the MBT right now, in terms of not just bus operators, but also streetcar motor persons, many of those frontline personnel who keep the trains moving, keep the buses moving. We have a whole team of people working on different ways, and we're looking at all sorts of different things, whether it's hiring bonuses, referral bonuses, just straight up paying people more, looking at the progression of how we pay new hires. So there's a lot, and also one of the biggest things that I hear on the scheduling side is split days, and can we make more streets so that people don't have to come in very early in the morning and then kind of hang out for a few hours in the middle of the day or otherwise not work and then come back for the afternoon peak. So we're looking at a whole bunch of different ways to make the position more appealing so that we can ensure that we have all the people that we need to do to make this happen. So we're definitely working on that.
Andy, I think you were next.
Yep. And I'm totally blanking because I was really interested in the answer about the labor question. So I've had a chance to actually ask some questions already. So I don't know if Susan just wants to go while I try to think about what my question originally was.
I actually, while I do have questions, I will look forward to the map in the interest of time. And I really just wanted to say this is a huge undertaking and how much I appreciate all the thought that went into this and the careful examination of all the comments. And, you know, there's a lot of people not loving on the tea right now, but I just want to say, like, this is a tremendous undertaking. We don't have a grid-like system like Chicago. So I appreciate all your efforts on this, and I look forward to digging into the maps. Thank you.
By the way, Sue, look at the 76 because we added midday service.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
I can bring that. Oh, I'm not sure my screen anymore. Never mind.
I remember what my question was, and it was in terms of how you present this material to the public. Are you kind of going to start off with the assumption that people have not been following this process in terms of how you describe changes? I think there could be some confusion for folks. And I just wanted to just kind of get a sense from you all how you plan on kind of presenting it. Is it as if it's brand new and nobody's really paying attention, or is it as if they followed along through the process?
Yeah, that is a real concern. So the way that the printed materials are going to work is they are going to be referential to the draft map that we put out in May. So the changes described are going to be changes that we made to the draft map. And part of the reason why is because we're trying to say, like, hey, we put out a proposal, we heard a lot of feedback on it, we've made a ton of changes to it based on the feedback that we got. Like, we want to demonstrate to folks how responsive we're trying to be to that feedback. When we actually go to the board vote in November, I anticipate that we're going to modify our materials a little bit to describe the difference between what exists today and what would exist in the final network. Because the board obviously, like, is going to want to see, like, okay, what is the route change that you're proposing? We won't have that for the publication of this next week, but I do want to have that for late November. And then that would probably be the materials that become like evergreen throughout the implementation process, and folks would be referring to.
So we are just about to run up to time, and I know the committee wanted to have sort of time to discuss next steps and sort of how we're going to think through the committee's response to this. I want to propose maybe another time, because I know folks have to jump off at 10 to have that conversation. So just putting it out there, could Tuesday at noon work for folks on the committee? We want to have a separate follow-up meeting, and that only needs to be a half hour maybe, so you still get time for lunch. Oh, thanks, Doug.
That looks like it would work for me.
Yeah, I'm hearing no opposition, so in that case,
It'll work for me.
okay, great.
Yeah. I just had to check my calendar. Yeah.
Brian, do you want me to send out the invite, or do you want to do it? It's up to you.
Why don't you let me do it just for open meeting law purposes, because we track all that stuff.
Great, thank you. All right, I can say a little past 10, but I don't want to take up Doug or Melissa's time unless you guys are open to doing that. So I'll sort of pause there, and we can open the floor back up to more questions if you guys are able to answer.
I can stay for a few more minutes.
I actually, I have a question about another topic for a future meeting, if I could raise that real quick before everyone departs. So I know that when we established this committee, it was also the committee that was going to look at paratransit. And I'm just wondering if we can get that maybe on a future agenda. You know, there's been talk about, you know, should the state maybe take that over? The state obviously offers other types of demand services. So I'd be interested to dig into that and also hear an update on some of the changes with paratransit. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds good. And we can also talk about future meetings at that meeting on Tuesday as well. Topics we want to bring up, because I think paratransit is an important topic that we oftentimes overlook as a region.
Thank you.
Well, in terms of helping the board, you know, vote positively on this one, how does the favorable unfavorables compare to other properties that have gone through this process? I remember early on, you were indicating that in other places that there have been a lot of unfavorable opinions when these proposals were made, and that part of you're preparing people that you need to push through this, because once it's adopted, generally attitudes change. So do you know how favorables and unfavorables compare? Even to some of the early slides that you presented early in the process.
Sorry, I just want to make sure, I apologize, I was reading an email. I just want to make sure I understand the question correctly. You're asking sort of how the changes have been received by folks?
Well, no, I guess the survey that you were showing that there was 40% that were favorable, strongly favorable, or not favorable, and then 48% that were favorable, 40 strongly unfavorable, or mildly unfavorable. And I was just wondering how that compared to other attempts to do things like this.
Oh, that's a good question.
In other places.
Oh, you mean like in other transit agencies?
Yeah, right.
In the US? Gotcha. Well, it's a good question. So I'm definitely not an expert on that, but from what I do understand, there are a lot of agencies that are right now engaging in network redesigns.
Yeah.
There have been some that have done it already, like Houston was one of the first cities to do it. And there was apparently a massively overwhelming opposition to what they had proposed. But in that situation, it was easier for the agency to just go ahead and implement it anyways. And so then they did, and then ridership increased by something like 15% after they implemented the new network. So even though there was a massive backlash at first, it ended up leading to an increase in ridership. And I think it's generally perceived favorably now. But
I think that's the one I was recalling. So I would just say, emphasize that, because I think our numbers are actually better. By looks like 15 percentage points. So and that's with before you have made the changes. So it'll be, I don't think you'll have a chance to do a survey after you've made the changes. But so overall, then I'm kind of encouraged that it's only 50% that were disagreed or strongly disagreed with the proposed network design. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and it was very kind of specific to neighborhoods and routes as well. So we think that we have addressed a lot of the concerns that were brought up.
Yeah,
not everyone, but
yeah. Doug, I had kind of a follow-up to Len's point, although not focused on the national, but focused more on our region. And in the last point you made, it doesn't seem like there may be time to collect the same feedback to be able to inform the communities or the MBTA board if the revised proposal changed those numbers on that first slide that you showed. So
yeah,
that would be helpful to elected officials and presumably the MBTA board, because then it could show that it improved from your first, if there was time to collect that.
That's a good point. Yeah, and I think depending on how the schedule goes, and